Robson. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
So the book is Our Darkest Night, which today is like its birthday and your birthday, I understand.
It is.
Right?
It's a double birthday. That's what my editor said in her email this morning. It's my double book birthday.
And I'm sure it feels a little bit like giving birth when you send your book out into the world.
There's surprising parallels, I must say. But at the end of which you're presented with this lovely, reward of a, in my case, it's a book that I get to share with people. And people have been saying the loveliest things today. I'm feeling kind of awash in kindness. It's a great way to spend a birthday, I have to say.
Yes. And tell us where you're joining us from now, too.
So I live in Toronto, very snowy and cold where I am right now. And, we're in a kind of a modified lockdown right now. So it's just, there's a lot of what my husband likes to call precious family togetherness right now, with all four of us, with 2 kids, my husband and I, menagerie of pets jammed into our house. But we're making it work. It's all good. It's all good. But a lot of time spent together.
Right. Yes. And then it's funny because you're visiting all these other parts of the country and the world now today, right? Talking about your book.
Yeah.
Tell us about the plot of Our Darkest Night.
So, the book effectively starts, there's a little preamble, but it effectively starts in 1943, in the fall of 1943. In 1943 was a pretty terrible year across the board for human history, right? I mean, it's just, there's not a lot of good news coming anywhere in 1943. And let's, as much as we now have hindsight, people then really had no expectation necessarily that the war would be won by the Allies. So it was looking pretty dire. Again, remember, we're almost a year out from the Normandy landings. People were just living, they're waking up every morning with dread. And really no one more than my character Antonina, because in the fall of 1943, Mussolini's government has fallen, and he's been installed as kind of a puppet leader of what they call the Republic of Salo. And effectively, the Nazi occupation of Italy has begun, and it encompasses almost all of Italy. I mean, there are parts that remained, free of kind of Nazi occupation, but most of it was in the hands of the Germans. And that's when things became dramatically worse for Italian Jews, because the deportations started. And so it's at this point where the book begins, where Antonina, who becomes Nina, is forced to leave behind her parents. Her mother's an invalid and cannot travel. Her father's a physician and is not only will not leave her mother, but he has patients to see to in Venice, where they live, secretly, because he's not supposed to be practicing medicine. But he finds a place for her to go in the Italian countryside where he hopes she'll be safe, where she can hide and live out the end of the war. And she very reluctantly agrees to go and to live with a stranger and his family. And all she knows about this man is that her father's longtime friend, who happens to be a Catholic priest, former patient of her father, in fact, that this priest lives in a tiny village in the middle of nowhere called Mezzocelle. And he is friends with a young man who has agreed to pretend that she is his wife and to hide her amid his family. And the only people that will know will be Father Bernardi, the priest, and this young man, Nicola Gerardi. And so she goes and leaves behind everything. I mean, she's a city girl, and suddenly she's living on a farm, and quite a modest farm, with just, very, very few comforts and a lot of work. This is, anybody who's grown up on a farm, has spent time on a farm, knows you get up at the crack of dawn, you work all day, and you fall into bed, and you get up the next day, you do the same thing, and you never get a day off. And that's what life was like on this farm.
When we meet her in the beginning, we get this glimpse of that, a sliver of a glimpse of that former life.
Yeah. And it just, as I was writing the book, it broke my heart to be doing these things to Antonina. to take her away from her parents who love her so much. And I mean that they are a very close family, a close loving family. And these are the choices that people were being forced to make every day in this period.
You do need to go to some dark places to tell
Mhm.
this story accurately,
Yeah.
to reflect what she really experienced, or what a character at that time would have experienced.
Yeah, yeah. It's it, and what I was trying to accomplish, and I'll have to leave it to readers to decide whether they think I've done it. And it's a very fine line to walk to honor the true horror, not honor it, but to respect what happened to people, and to write about it respectfully, and to not diminish it in the retelling. I mean, that's a very hard thing to do without at the same time falling over into kind of wallowing in the violence and horror, which can be numbing, I think, to a lot of readers. And I have that reaction when I read anything that's steeped in violence and malevolence. It you kind of clam up in a way, and to walk that line so that people can see and understand it while at the same time not being so horrified that they can't bear to read on it's a hard line. And that's, again, I spent a lot of sleepless nights worrying that had I got this right, was I telling it right? Because the thing is, I'm first of all, I'm a Gentile. I'm not Jewish. I do not feel that I have any innate right to write this book at all. And feel, and I still feel that rather than having the right to create this story, what I needed to do was to earn the privilege of telling it, which I think is a very different thing. Um, and I hope that people reading it will be able to see what I've tried to do. Um, it's just something that weighed upon me. But again, not telling the story, there was a point at which that did not seem possible, because I think it's a story that people need to know about. Again, and the farther away we get from it in time, the more important it is that historians and writers take up, take up this mission, as it were, to keep the history alive. Yeah.
So I understand too that this story is personal for you and your family in a lot of ways. Tell us how it came about. It was sort of like a discovery of a little bit of lost history.
It was exactly that. It's this very late blooming discovery. My husband and I have been married for almost 20 years, and I was embraced into this Italian family from the very beginning. His late parents were Canadian, but they'd been born and brought up in Italy, in the north of Italy, not far from Venice. And when my husband and I were on a trip there in 2016 and visiting all the family. You cannot get away with, nor would we want to, not visit everyone. And there's a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins galore still living there. And we were visiting his Zia Maria, who is in her 80s now, just a lovely, lovely lady. Suddenly, as we were sitting having our umpteenth cup of espresso for the day, Zia was talking about how her father had hid Jewish families in the farmhouse during the war. And I practically fell off my chair. And she wasn't able to ever tell us much more than that, because she was a little girl when this happened, and almost everyone involved has since passed away. And her older sister, was my mother-in-law, had died, and no one, of course, had ever talked about it. I think because people just don't tend to talk about the war that much. It was a really horrible time. Why would you just bring it up in the middle of a dinner table conversation and make everyone feel terrible? But I wanted to know more. So it wasn't something I went and kind of dug into right away. It was really when my son, who was studying the Second World War at school, asked me if I could ever know it was true. Did we know if it were true? That I thought, well, I guess I better dig into it, if only so that I can tell my children one way or another. And one of the first things that I was able to confirm is that the little town where they lived, called San Zenone delle Ezzelini, again, which is about, it's about an hour's drive outside of Venice, and in the foothills of the Alps, a very beautiful place. That it was a hotspot of resistance during the war. And much of that resistance was led very quietly, very discreetly by the local parish priest who was called Father Odostoko. And in 2010, he was posthumously named Righteous Among the Nations by Yad Vashem in recognition of his valor and selflessness in saving dozens and dozens of Jewish Italians from deportation and what would have been certain death. And he hid them in the homes of his parishioners. Now, we believe, just based on the testimony of the surviving aunts, that my husband's parents were among those. Now, it's not something I can prove. I want to be absolutely transparent about that. We cannot prove it at this stage. And at a certain point, that became not as important to me as I thought it would be, because what became important to me was learning more about what happened to the Jewish people of Italy during the war. And so I could tell the story from the point of view of an historian, but I could tell it from the point of view of a novelist, and from the fictional point of view of the character who became Antonina.
You have some amazing photo evidence really from this time and from your family.
You know what? This time last January, I went to Italy with my husband. I mostly finished the book, but I wanted to retrace the steps of Antonina and to really see the world through her eyes. And so we spent time in my husband's family's home village and the outlying villages where various relatives had lived during the war. And I got to visit the farmhouse where we believe his grandparents helped to shelter Italian Jews from the Nazis. And just to see this place and to be shown, well, there's the window, of the room where they hid. And when danger approached, when, the local police or German soldiers were coming, to look for food or materials to take, right, to commandeer. They were afraid that if they searched the upstairs, they might find the refugees. So the people staying with them would have to hide on the stable roof, flatten themselves on it, and hope nobody looks up. And then there was a wardrobe in the upstairs room that would be pulled in front of the window, so that no one would think to go looking out the window and discover the people who were hiding there. And it just, to see that place, I just, I get choked up thinking about it.
That comes across so much in the novel, just the decency and the humanity of good people trying to stop this horror, or at least,
yeah,
as you said, do what they could.
And there weren't enough of them, but there were good people to be found who wanted to help. And I wanted to show that. But at the same time, the focus of this book is absolutely firmly on Antonina, because she's the heart of this story, right? It belongs to her. This is her book, and everyone else is there as really secondary figures. But Antonina is the one that I love from this book.
So now this is your 6th novel, is that right?
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, wow, that's got to be, is that a magic number in a way, I wonder? Like,
it's just, for me, I never expected I'd end up doing this. I trained as an academic. I thought I would teach at college, and then there just weren't any teaching jobs when I finished in the late 1990s. And I kind of went sideways and worked as an editor and a journalist for years. And it was when I was at home on my first, what was effectively a maternity leave. Actually, my second one, really, because I had a toddler, and then I just went straight into it, once he was 2, we thought, oh, time for another one. And then when I was at home with the 2 little ones, the baby and the very busy 2.5-year-old, I really felt like I needed something more to do. As much as I loved being at home with them, I loved being a mom. And so I started experimenting with just writing down these ideas I had. A book that I wanted to set it in the First World War, and kind of fast forward. I think it took me a couple of years to write it and about another 3 years to find an agent and sell it. I started in when I was 37, and then I ended up selling it about 6 years later.
That's interesting. So you studied at Oxford.
I
Uh,
did.
so you're steeped in the history too, right? That your books are set in. And then you worked in publishing. And yet it's funny because I almost would have thought, oh, you know how it all works. And so it would be really quick once you decided to sort of
Yeah.
get something ready, but it still took its time, or took its process, I
Yeah.
guess.
For me, it was, uh, I wrote about something that wasn't fashionable or hot at the time that I wrote it. So I guess I was starting in about 2007 or so, where, you know, not a lot of, there weren't a lot of books being published about the First World War. And there just wasn't, although readers have since said to me, well, I would have read it, but I'm not sure publishers really knew what to do with books set in that era at that time. Then Downton Abbey came along, and it changed everything for so many writers like myself. And what it did is it opened up this idea that we can write about the 20th century as historical fiction, and that readers will love it. And there'd always been interest in the Second World War, but I think that has grown as well over time.
And the book you're talking about, that first book was Somewhere in France,
Yeah.
right? Which I read this weekend in one day.
Oh, well, we call it, it's funny, we
Yeah.
call it at my team at HarperCollins, we talk about the little book that could, because, when it came out, I was a complete unknown, like a less than zero nobody in the world of publishing. And I had very modest expectations for the book, having worked in publishing. And you really, if just a few hundred people beyond my own immediate family had bought it, I think I would have been okay with that. And then it just caught on, and it keeps selling and selling and I think it's into its 20th edition now. And, I get letters or emails mostly every day from people saying they've read it.
I didn't realize till after I finished it and started looking through some of the other novels to say, oh, what'll I read next? That novel gave birth to several other novels and characters. Was that always the plan from the beginning, or did that happen to you as you were developing these characters?
It was, in the sense that, I hoped I'd get to have another book published. And so when I set about writing the second one, fortunately, HarperCollins did want to publish it. And I'd had this idea that I would take the best friend of my heroine from the first book, and because I had all these questions I wanted answered and about what happened to her, and also the heroine's brother from the first book, who was a very troubled man, really afflicted by what we would now call PTSD. I wanted to know what happened to these people, and the only way I could find out was by writing the story down. And then there was a third book, and then I thought, I need a little break from the Great War. I will return to it one day, but I wanted to move on in time a bit. And that's when I started writing about the Second World War. So this book, Our Darkest Night, is the third book. They're not, these books aren't connected to the same degree. But I think what I'm trying to do is similar in all three books. And again, it's to offer a point of view that's a little different from the normal point of view of a lot of historical fiction, a lot of which is written and it's centered around heroes or soldiers. And I love those books, don't get me wrong, but I'm really interested in writing about women, and women whose stories aren't often told. So in The Gown, for example, it takes place after the war, but it's still a book about the Second World War, effectively. I'm talking about the women who helped to embroider Princess Elizabeth's wedding gown in 1947.
That book was a huge hit, right? I mean, your books have a really strong following, but that just broke you.
I must say, and people have really embraced the gown. And I think it's because I'm as interested in reading about the royal family as anyone else. I just didn't think I could tell the story I wanted to tell from their point of view. what I really wanted to know was, what was it like to be someone working at Hartnell's, which was a lovely place to work by the standards of the time. And he was a very, very decent man.
And Hartnell's, for anyone who hasn't read it, is
Yes, Norman Hartnell, who designed not only the Queen's, well, she was princess then, her wedding gown, but also her coronation gown. He designed Princess Margaret's wedding gown. If you're at all familiar with royal fashion, he's kind of one of the big names. And he was very renowned as a designer in London from the 1930s through to the 1970s. And we know a lot about Norman Hartnell, but we don't know very much about the women who worked for him. And that's what I wanted to do, was kind of go behind the scenes. Who doesn't love a good behind the scenes point of view? Whether it's, below stairs in something like Downton Abbey or what have you, or behind the scenes of a movie being made, or again like a fashion designer. Who are the people making these gowns that we see? And we don't often learn their names even today. It's rare that we would know anything about the people who worked on say the Duchess of Cambridge's wedding gown. We know the name of the designer, but we don't necessarily know who stitched the gown. And I wanted to tell those stories because those people are the people who are most directly affected by what life was like in Britain after the Second World War, when life was really difficult. And again, it's I'm just always interested in telling the story, finding a way of telling the story that's new. I mean, it's not earth-shatteringly new, but new enough that it offers a different perspective and maybe a different appreciation of the period that I'm writing about. And the same is true of this new book.
It's so interesting to me as a reader to think that you started out as a historian, right, buried in books in so many ways, right, in those studies, and yet now you're just bringing these stories to life in a way that I'm sure you couldn't even have imagined when you started out as a young woman. It's just what a gift.
It's kind of teaching without all the tough parts, to be honest. I don't have to sit through meetings, like departmental meetings, which my friends who teach complain about. Especially now, one thing I do miss is not getting to engage with readers one-on-one like I normally would in the course of promoting a book. That's something I love. But it's a small price to pay to make sure that people are safe, right? The next book around, I'll get to come and I'll get to go on tour. I'll get to hug everyone. Be a lot of hugging. I'm not normally a huggy person, but I feel that all bets are off. I'll be leaning in for the hugs from the readers the next time I see them in person.
I'm glad you mentioned that because you have such a devoted following and you really take care of your readers. I love looking through your website because you give all kinds of fun little extras for book clubs. You have open invitation to book clubs, to Skype or Zoom or visit them.
And it's so easy, right? I mean, especially now with things like Zoom, I don't even have to leave the house. And I get to talk to people all over the place and just, the loveliest groups of people. And I love hearing people's stories. Every book club that I attend virtually now, I come away with at least one amazing story of somebody who had a family member live through the war. They themselves, have memories that are fascinating. And it's like, I mean, I walk away like I got to go to book club with them, and it's wonderful.
It's just so clear you're doing exactly what you were meant to do.
It feels pretty wonderful, and I wake up every day feeling grateful for it, and thinking of new ideas, new books I can share with people.
Any hints you can share, or?
I can. I have a working title, which you never know whether you'll get to keep it. But it's called Coronation Year. The book is set in 1953, and the setting is a tiny little, kind of an eccentric little hotel in London that's been around forever. It's a family-owned hotel, it's very kind of the proprietor is a young woman. Actually, it's been left to her by her parents. and who is astonished when the route for the Great Coronation Parade is published ahead of the Queen's coronation in 1953. Her hotel, surprisingly, is on the route. It's, there was the routes for the parades differed with each coronation, and suddenly she has frontage on a London street where people are paying thousands of pounds to view the coronation. That's the premise, where, in the run up, there's all this excitement, but it's also, again, a chance for me to dig in and ask, well, what was life like for people in England in 1953? What hardships were they still struggling with? What hopes did they have for the future? And what did something like the coronation mean to them? And so I'm still working on it, and I hope I'll have it ready for, ideally, not this summer, but the summer after. So more like a year and a half stretch, but we'll see. We'll see if I trip up when I'm writing it. There might be a bit more of a wait.
It's great because I can just see on your face like how much you love this and how much you're enjoying this process of digging.
Well, I'm writing and I'm researching as I go, and I love that part. And I've had to set it aside for a few weeks because of all the fun and busyness of Our Darkest Night being launched. But I'll get back to it before too long. And I call that retreating into my writer's cave. We all do that when we need to focus. So you'll see fewer and fewer posts from me, and that's because I'm busy scribbling away.
In your happy place.
Yes, definitely.
Jennifer Robson, thank you so much for talking with us. It's been so much fun.
Thank you.